Welcome to one of the most disturbing cases ever recorded in American history. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested to know how far these documented accounts reach and at what times of day or night they're being heard. In the summer of 1843, when the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains in western North Carolina still harbored secrets unknown to most, a peculiar discovery was made near the township of Morganton. According to county records dated September 12th of that year, a survey team mapping property boundaries came across an abandoned cabin approximately 17 miles northeast of town, nestled against the lower slopes of what locals called Linville Mountain. The property, according to tax assessments from 1839, belonged to the Bennett family, who had seemingly vanished without notice some 4 years prior. What might have been dismissed as yet another case of frontier abandonment became something else entirely when the survey team's leader, a certain Mr. Harold Clements, noticed unusual markings carved into the cabin's foundation stones. These markings, described in his field notes as neither decorative nor accidental, but purposeful in their precision, would later become central to understanding what truly happened at the Bennett property. The official report filed with the Burke County Clerk stated only that the property appeared long uninhabited and that personal effects remained as if departure had been sudden and unplanned. A subsequent inventory conducted by the sheriff's office noted farm implements still hanging in the barn, preserved food in the root cellar, and clothing in wardrobes. The report concluded with a recommendation that efforts be made to locate the family or any known relations who might claim the property. What the official documentation failed to mention, however, was the small leather-bound journal discovered beneath a loose floorboard in the master bedroom. This journal, according to an 1867 article in the Asheville Citizen, remained in the private possession of Sheriff Thomas Gillespie until his death in 1858, after which it passed to his nephew, who later donated it to the North Carolina Historical Society. The journal was catalogued but restricted from public view until 1964, when portions were transcribed for a doctoral dissertation on frontier life. That dissertation was never published, and the researcher, a Professor Martin Hewitt from Duke University, reportedly abandoned his academic career shortly afterward. The journal belonged to Josiah Bennett, patriarch of the Bennett family and owner of the abandoned property. Its contents shed light on events that began in the early months of 1842 and culminated in the family's disappearance in late autumn of 1843. What follows is an account pieced together from the journal entries, county records, newspaper clippings, and oral histories collected from neighboring families during a brief investigation conducted in 1951 by the Burke County Historical Commission. The Bennett family consisted of Josiah, age 42, his wife Sarah, 38, their 3 sons William, 22, Thomas, 19, and James, 18, and their daughter Rebecca, 20. According to census records, the Bennetts also owned 7 slaves. The property, approximately 160 acres, included cultivated fields, a small apple orchard, and undeveloped woodland extending up the mountain slope. From all accounts, the Bennetts were neither particularly wealthy nor notably poor, but rather typical of the middling farm families that populated the region. They attended the Methodist Church in Morganton semi-regularly, paid their taxes promptly, and maintained cordial, if not close, relationships with neighboring families. Nothing in the public record suggested anything unusual about them or their circumstances until the winter of 1842. It was then, according to Josiah's journal, that the first unusual incidents began to occur. The initial entry describing something amiss was dated January 23, 1842. Josiah wrote, "Samuel has gone missing these past 2 days. The boy has never attempted escape before. Thomas and James rode to neighboring farms but found no trace. Most peculiar was the absence of tracks in the fresh snow. It is as if he simply vanished from the property. Samuel, according to inventory records, was a male slave, approximately 30 years of age, who had been purchased by Josiah Bennett in 1837 from an estate sale in Charleston. He was described as strong of build, capable with carpentry and stonework, unmarried. The journal mentions Samuel frequently as being assigned to various building projects on the property, including an expansion of the root cellar and the construction of a stone wall along the eastern boundary. 3 days after the initial report of Samuel's disappearance, Josiah recorded, "Samuel returned at dawn, found him collapsed at the edge of the upper field. Clothes torn, feet bloodied, unable or unwilling to speak of where he had been. Dr. Winters summoned from town, diagnosis of exhaustion and exposure. Confined to quarters in stable." The following weeks included sporadic mentions of Samuel's recovery and gradual return to work duties, though Josiah noted the man had become withdrawn and watchful. By March, the journal suggests life had returned to normal, with preparations for spring planting underway and no further mention of unusual behavior. On April 17th, however, Josiah recorded a conversation with Samuel that would mark the beginning of the Bennett family's descent into tragedy. The entry reads, "Samuel approached me today with an unusual request. He claims to have discovered a cave opening in the upper woods while gathering kindling, described it as a doorway into the mountain, asked permission to explore it further. Something in his manner unsettled me. Denied request and instructed him to avoid that section of our property henceforth." 2 days later, Josiah noted that Samuel had been caught attempting to leave the property at night. As punishment, he was confined to the small storage shed adjacent to the barn, with his ankles shackled. The journal expresses puzzlement rather than anger. "It is not like Samuel to be so defiant. He has always been the most reliable of our people. Something has changed in him." The next significant entry came nearly 2 weeks later, on May 2nd. "Samuel escaped in the night. Shackles found broken in the shed. The strength required to break iron of that thickness is concerning. Thomas and I searched the property at first light, found fresh footprints leading up toward the mountain. We'll organize a more thorough search tomorrow if he does not return." The search party, consisting of Josiah, his sons, and 3 neighboring farmers, followed Samuel's trail up into the wooded slopes of Linville Mountain. According to the journal, they discovered evidence of someone having cleared a narrow path through the underbrush, leading to a rocky outcropping approximately 2 miles from the Bennett cabin. "The trail ended at a narrow fissure in the rock face," Josiah wrote. "Too small for a man to enter, though it appeared attempts had been made to widen it. Strange markings had been carved into the surrounding stone, similar to those Samuel had recently added to our well cover without permission. Called into the opening but received no response. James suggested using black powder to widen the entrance. Denied this suggestion as too dangerous. Left markers to find the location again and returned home before nightfall." The following day's entry was brief. "Samuel returned of his own accord this morning, clothes caked with red clay and some darker substance. Refuses to speak of where he has been. Confined him to the root cellar with double restraints." Here the journal details an increasing atmosphere of tension within the household. Sarah Bennett reportedly refused to enter the root cellar to retrieve preserved foods, sending daughter Rebecca instead. The sons took turns standing guard outside Samuel's makeshift cell. Josiah recorded his wife as saying she could hear Samuel whispering in an unknown tongue throughout the night, though he himself claimed to hear nothing when he checked. On May 12th, Josiah wrote that he had sent a letter to a former owner of Samuel's, inquiring about the man's background and any previous unusual behavior. While awaiting a response, he continued to keep Samuel confined, though he noted, "The man eats little of what we provide. His physical strength seems undiminished despite this. Twice I have found the restraints loosened, though not enough for escape. He watches me with eyes that seem to hold both fear and pity. The next significant development came on May 23rd, when Josiah recorded receiving a reply from Charleston. The letter, from the widow of Samuel's previous owner, contained little useful information but mentioned that Samuel had been purchased as part of a group of slaves from a plantation in the coastal region of Georgia, near a settlement of people descended from both African slaves and indigenous tribes. In early June, the journal records that Samuel began speaking again, though in cryptic statements that Josiah found difficult to interpret. One entry quotes Samuel as saying, "The mountain has always been there, Master Bennett. Long before your people came, it knows the taste of blood. It remembers those it has taken." Throughout June and July, Josiah documented increasingly disturbed behavior, not only from Samuel, but from other members of the household. He noted that his youngest son, James, had begun sleepwalking, twice being found at the edge of the property, facing toward the mountain. His wife complained of headaches and hearing what she described as scratching within the walls. The other slaves reportedly refused to work alone in the fields closest to the mountain and had taken to wearing small pouches of herbs around their necks. By August, Josiah had relocated Samuel from the root cellar to a reinforced shed further from the main house, concerned that his presence was somehow affecting the family. He wrote, "Samuel speaks more frequently now, though I almost prefer his silence. He claims the mountain has chosen our family, though for what purpose he will not say. Says it began when he discovered the cave, but that now it knows the taste of us all. I threatened the lash if he continues such talk." On August 12th, the first physical evidence of something truly amiss appeared. Josiah wrote, "Discovered unusual markings carved into the posts of our bed this morning, similar to those Samuel had made and those at the cave entrance. Sarah swears no one entered our bedroom during the night. Thomas suggests Samuel has taught one of the house slaves his madness. We'll question them individually tomorrow." The questioning yielded no confessions. In fact, Josiah noted with evident frustration that two of the female house slaves had fled the property, taking with them nothing but the clothes on their backs. A search of the remaining slave quarters revealed similar markings carved into the wooden walls of their cabin. By September, the journal entries become more fragmented and show signs of increasing paranoia. Josiah recorded finding similar markings appearing throughout the property, on fence posts, the well cover, even the handles of farm tools. He wrote, "It is as if the markings spread like a disease from one surface to another, burned the affected tools. Considered burning the slave cabin, but fear the consequences of such a drastic action becoming known in town." On September 23rd, Josiah noted that his oldest son, William, had begun spending unusual amounts of time in the woods, returning with unexplained soil stains on his clothing. When confronted, William reportedly claimed he was merely hunting, though he brought back no game. Josiah wrote, "There is a distance in my son's eyes that was not there before. When he looks at me, I feel he is seeing something else, something beyond me." The situation deteriorated further in early October. Josiah recorded that his wife Sarah had taken to locking herself in their bedroom during the day, claiming she could no longer bear the weight of the mountain's shadow. Daughter Rebecca had developed a persistent cough that produced flecks of what Josiah described as dark matter, like coal dust, but somehow moist. Local physician Dr. Winters could provide no diagnosis or effective treatment. Perhaps most disturbing was a brief entry from October 12th. Found James standing before Samuel's shed at midnight. The boy was barefoot despite the autumn chill. When I called to him, he turned to me with an expression I have never seen on my son's face, said only, "He knows the way in. We must let him show us." Escorted James back to the house. He remembers nothing of the incident this morning, By mid-October, Josiah noted that Samuel had ceased eating entirely, yet showed no signs of physical deterioration. If anything, he wrote, he appears stronger, more substantial somehow. The restraints no longer seem adequate. Found him standing at the shed door this morning, still technically chained, but with enough slack to move freely within the space. He smiled at me. It was not a smile of submission or reconciliation. On October 25th, Josiah made a decision that would later be seen as the turning point in the Bennett family's fate. He wrote, "Can no longer tolerate the deterioration of my family and property. Thomas and I will take Samuel to the cave he discovered. We'll have him show us what lies within. Perhaps understanding the source of his obsession will provide means to counter it. James insists on accompanying us. William refuses, saying he already knows what waits there. Sarah begged us not to go, but offers no alternative solution." The next entry, dated October 27th, is significantly longer than most and shows signs of having been written in haste. God help us for what we have witnessed. The fissure Samuel led us to has widened considerably since our last visit, now large enough for a man to enter with ease. Samuel went in willingly, without restraint, as if drawn by some force within. We followed with lanterns and rifles at ready. The passage descended steeply into the mountain. Walls showed same markings as those that have plagued our property, but older, worn by time. Air grew increasingly warm and thick with moisture as we descended. After perhaps a quarter-mile, passage opened into a chamber of considerable size. What we found there defies rational explanation. Central to the chamber was a formation of rock resembling a crude altar. Surrounding it were human remains in various states of decay. Some appeared quite recent. Samuel approached the altar as if greeting an old friend, placed his hand upon it, and turned to us, with eyes reflecting our lantern light in a manner that was not natural. He spoke then of the mountain's hunger, of sacrifices made by the original people of this land. Said that the mountain had slept until he discovered its doorway, but now it had awakened and chosen our family to serve it. James moved forward as if entranced. Thomas restrained him. Then came a sound from deeper within the chamber, a grinding of stone upon stone. A passage we had not noticed began to open along the far wall. Samuel smiled and said, "The mountain opens itself to you now, Master Bennett. It offers a trade. Your family's blood for knowledge no white man has ever possessed." I fired my rifle at the opening passage, fearing what might emerge. The shot echoed deafeningly in the enclosed space. Samuel lunged at me with unexpected speed. In the struggle, Thomas also fired his weapon. Samuel fell, wounded but not killed. The ground beneath us trembled. Small stones fell from the ceiling. We retreated, dragging James, who fought against us. Samuel remained by the altar, watching our departure with an expression of pity. The last words I heard him speak as we entered the passage back to the surface. "It matters not. The mountain has tasted your presence now. It will not forget. It will not forgive." The final entries in Josiah's journal document a rapid unraveling of the Bennett family's cohesion and sanity. He noted that James had become virtually catatonic after their return from the cave, responding to no external stimuli for nearly 48 hours before suddenly returning to awareness with no memory of their expedition. William disappeared from the property on November 1st, leaving behind a note that Josiah transcribed into the journal. "Gone to prepare a place for us within. The offering has been accepted. The path is open." By mid-November, Josiah recorded that he had begun boarding up windows and doors at night, convinced that something was attempting to enter the house. He wrote of hearing scratching at the walls and footsteps on the roof. Most disturbing, he noted finding the same strange markings appearing on his own skin, like bruises forming the patterns without any injury having occurred. Sarah Bennett reportedly refused to sleep, maintaining a vigil with a loaded shotgun pointed at the bedroom door. daughter Rebecca's condition had worsened to the point that she could no longer leave her bed, her cough producing increasing amounts of the mysterious dark substance. The remaining slaves fled the property on November 18th. Josiah made no mention of attempting to pursue them. Instead, he wrote, "Let them go. Better for them to face the law's punishment for escape than what awaits us here. I fear we have passed beyond the point where departure would save us." The final dated entry in the journal is from November 22nd, 1843. Thomas found William's body at the edge of the upper field this morning. Condition suggests he had been dead for several days, though we heard him calling to James from the darkness just last night. Most disturbing was the absence of marks upon him. No wounds, no signs of violence or illness, as if life had simply been drawn out of him. Tonight we make our final stand. Thomas has brought every weapon from town that he could purchase or borrow. Sarah has prepared the house as if for a siege. Rebecca, we have made as comfortable as possible. James sits by her bedside, whispering to her in what sounds at times like the same strange language Samuel used. I record these events knowing they may be discovered someday. Let it be known that the Bennett family faced its end with courage. Let it be known also that there are places in these mountains that should remain unexplored, doorways that should remain sealed. The native peoples knew this. We, in our pride, did not heed the boundaries they respected. If you are reading this and have seen the markings I have described, burn this journal. Flee this region. Do not seek the cave on Linville Mountain. Some knowledge is too terrible a burden for any man to bear. The Bennett family was never found. The property remained abandoned until 1851, when it was purchased at auction by a family named Richardson. According to local newspaper accounts, the Richardsons abandoned the property after less than 6 months of residence, claiming unwholesome conditions made farming impossible. The cabin burned to the ground in 1855, reportedly due to a lightning strike. In 1951, when the Burke County Historical Commission attempted to locate the cave described in Josiah Bennett's journal, they found the relevant section of Linville Mountain had been significantly altered by a landslide sometime in the late 1800s. No cave entrance could be identified. Professor Martin Hewitt, the researcher who transcribed portions of the journal in 1964, reportedly made one final visit to the former Bennett property before abandoning his dissertation. According to his academic advisor, Hewitt returned from this visit visibly shaken, claiming he had found fresh markings carved into trees surrounding the old cabin site. He resigned from the doctoral program the following day and relocated to Oregon, where he lived in relative seclusion until his death in 1973. The journal itself was listed as misplaced in the North Carolina Historical Society's catalog system in 1967. Attempts to locate it have been unsuccessful. The Society's records indicate it was last accessed by an unnamed visitor who claimed to be researching family genealogy connected to the original Bennett property. Topographical surveys conducted by the U.S. Geological Survey in 1959 make no mention of unusual features on Linville Mountain beyond standard notations of elevation changes and drainage patterns. However, local hikers occasionally report finding unusual markings carved into trees and rocks in the vicinity of the former Bennett property. County records show that no permanent structure has been successfully maintained on the original Bennett land since the cabin burned in 1855. The property has changed hands 27 times since then, with no owner holding title for more than 4 years. In 1968, during construction of a Forest Service road approximately 1 mile from the former Bennett property, workers uncovered what appeared to be human remains. According to the medical examiner's report, The skeletal remains belong to an adult male of African descent, estimated to have died in the mid-19th century. The cause of death could not be determined, but the examiner noted unusual markings that appeared to have been carved into several of the bones post-mortem. These remains were sent to the State University for further study, but were reportedly lost in transit. The Forest Service road was rerouted for what official documentation describes as environmental considerations. To this day, the area surrounding the former Bennett property remains largely undeveloped. Hikers in the region have reported feeling watched, experiencing sudden drops in temperature and hearing what they describe as whispering in an unidentifiable language. Park rangers dismiss these accounts as the product of imagination influenced by local folklore. Perhaps most unsettling is the testimony of Daniel Richardson, great-grandson of the family that briefly owned the property after the Bennett's disappearance. Interviewed by a local newspaper in 1957, the elderly Richardson recounted a story passed down through his family. "My great-grandfather told his children never to set foot on that land again. Said he'd woken one night to find his younger son standing at the foot of his bed, eyes open but unseeing, repeating the same phrase over and over. 'The mountain remembers. The mountain waits. The mountain hungers.' They packed their belongings that same night and never returned, even to collect the crops they'd planted." The area where the Bennett property once stood is now part of the Pisgah National Forest. Official maps mark it simply as undeveloped woodland. No historical marker acknowledges the events that transpired there. No walking path leads to the site of the cabin. But if one knows where to look, where the old survey boundaries once ran, one might still find trees marked with symbols that match no known alphabet. Symbols that, according to some accounts, appear to have been carved from the inside out, as if something within the wood were attempting to emerge. The land remembers, even when official history forgets. And on certain nights, when the wind moves through the valleys of western North Carolina just so, residents of the scattered homes that now dot the lower slopes of Linville Mountain report hearing sounds that might be the rustling of leaves, or might be whispered words in a language no living person speaks, a language that calls to something primitive and fearful within those who hear it, a language that suggests the mountain is still waiting, still remembering, still hungry. In 1972, a graduate student in cultural anthropology from the University of North Carolina became interested in the markings described in fragmentary reports about the Bennett case. Margaret Holloway, specializing in comparative symbology of indigenous cultures, discovered references to the Bennett Journal while researching regional folklore. Though unable to locate the journal itself, she compiled descriptions of the markings from Professor Hewitt's partial transcription and the medical examiner's report on the remains found in 1968. According to Holloway's unpublished thesis, the symbols shared distinctive characteristics with protective markings used by certain indigenous tribes that once inhabited the Western Carolina region. However, she noted significant differences that suggested a corruption or inversion of their original purpose. Where traditional tribal markings were meant to ward off malevolent spirits, the Bennett markings appeared to be invitational in nature. Holloway's academic advisors reportedly discouraged further research into the topic, citing methodological concerns. However, personal correspondence discovered among her effects after her disappearance in 1973 suggests she continued her investigation independently. In a letter to a colleague dated March 12, 1973, she wrote, "The pattern is too consistent to dismiss. Every 40 years, almost to the month, incidents occur in the vicinity of the former Bennett property. 1843, the Bennett family vanishes. 1883, The unexplained deaths of a survey team working in the area. 1923, the disappearance of the Carter family who had established a small homestead near the site. And now, as 1963 approaches, reports of unusual markings appearing on trees and rocks in the vicinity. Holloway's last known communication was a note left in her university office, going to verify the cycle firsthand. If my suspicions are correct, the mountain will be active again until November. The markings will lead me to whatever remains of the cave entrance. I believe I've decoded enough of the symbols to protect myself from their influence. A search party found her abandoned vehicle at a Forest Service trailhead, approximately 3 miles from the former Bennett property. Despite extensive efforts by local authorities and volunteer searchers, no trace of Margaret Holloway was ever discovered. Her research materials were collected by university officials and subsequently restricted from public access. In October 1973, a park ranger named Robert Jenkins reported finding fresh markings carved into trees along a rarely used trail near Linville Mountain. His report included rough sketches of the markings, which he described as unlike anything I've seen in 20 years of forestry work. Jenkins requested reassignment to another section of the National Forest shortly thereafter. His request was granted. The most recent documented incident connected to the Bennett property occurred in 2003. A group of hikers went missing for 72 hours after straying from marked trails in the Pisgah National Forest. When found, they were severely dehydrated and disoriented, unable to account for their movements during the missing time. The group's leader, a 36-year-old software engineer named David Morales, later checked himself into a psychiatric facility, claiming persistent hallucinations of symbols appearing beneath his skin. During his treatment, Morales produced dozens of drawings showing intricate patterns of interconnected symbols. When these drawings were later compared to the fragmentary descriptions of the Bennett markings from various historical sources, researchers noted disturbing similarities, despite Morales having no prior knowledge of the Bennett case. In a recorded therapy session, Morales stated, "The mountain doesn't want just anyone. It's selective. It waits and watches, sometimes for decades, until it finds a bloodline that resonates with whatever lives inside it. Then it calls to them. Makes them feel like they're coming home, even if they've never set foot there before." Morales was released from psychiatric care after 6 months, apparently recovered. He relocated to Alaska and has refused all requests for interviews regarding his experience. His medical records note that he insisted on having a small tattoo placed on his left wrist before leaving the facility, a simple design of interlocking triangles that he claimed would close the door the mountain opened in my mind. Public record searches reveal an interesting pattern regarding land ownership in the vicinity of the former Bennett property. Since 1963, various corporations have attempted to purchase parcels adjacent to the site for development purposes. In each case, the projects were abandoned after encountering what corporate documents vaguely describe as environmental complications or geological instabilities. The most recent such attempt, by a luxury resort developer in 2013, was halted after 3 separate geological survey teams produced conflicting reports about the stability of the underlying bedrock. One surveyor, speaking on condition of anonymity to a local newspaper, stated, "In 20 years of geological work, I've never seen readings like these. It was as if the composition of the rock was changing between measurements. One day, solid granite, the next, something more porous, with unexplainable hollow spaces. When we tried to core sample the anomalous areas, equipment failed in ways I can't explain. The mountain doesn't want to be examined too closely. Perhaps most disturbing are the genealogical connections that have emerged through recent historical research. County birth and death records, when cross-referenced with census data, reveal that many of the individuals drawn to the Bennett property or affected by events there share distant familial connections to either the Bennett family or to families that owned slaves in the same region during the early 19th century. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, a historian specializing in the documentation of enslaved peoples, published a paper in 2017 noting that several of the slaves owned by the Bennett family had been purchased from the same coastal Georgia plantation mentioned in Josiah Bennett's journal. Her research suggests this plantation was located near a settlement that combined African and indigenous practices in what she describes as a syncretic spiritual tradition focused on appeasing local land features believed to house powerful entities. Dr. Jen's paper speculates that Samuel may have brought knowledge of these practices with him when purchased by the Bennetts, knowledge that became dangerous when applied to whatever natural or archaeological feature he discovered within Linville Mountain. Her conclusion warns that the cultural erasure of enslaved people's knowledge means we may never fully understand what Samuel encountered or recognized in the mountain's geology. A recognition that the Bennett family, lacking this cultural context, was unprepared to properly interpret or respond to. Local folklore has preserved elements of the Bennett story, though often in altered form. Residents of Burke County tell stories of the hungry mountain to misbehaving children. Certain families maintain traditions of leaving small offerings, typically food items, at the edges of their properties facing Linville Mountain. When asked about these customs, most claim they are just old ways without specific meaning. In 2018, an amateur historian named Thomas Weaver attempted to organize an expedition to locate any remnants of the cave described in the Bennett Journal. His online fundraising campaign attracted significant attention from paranormal investigation groups, prompting the U.S. Forest Service to issue a statement reminding the public that unauthorized excavation on federal land is prohibited. The campaign was subsequently shut down by the hosting platform for violation of terms regarding potentially dangerous activities. Weaver continued his research independently, focusing on historical maps and land surveys of the area. In a podcast interview from early 2019, he claimed to have identified a promising location based on triangulation of various historical accounts. The podcast episode was removed from circulation 3 days after posting, with the creators citing legal concerns without further explanation. Weaver's social media accounts went dormant in October 2019. Acquaintances reported receiving postcards from him indicating he had relocated to South America for extended research opportunities. Attempts to contact him for this account were unsuccessful. Perhaps the most scientifically credible investigation of the Bennett property was conducted in 2020 by a geological research team from North Carolina State University. Using ground-penetrating radar and other non-invasive techniques, the team surveyed the area where the Bennett cabin reportedly stood. Their published findings note several anomalous features, including what appears to be a system of natural tunnels or caverns extending deep beneath Linville Mountain. The report characterizes these features as consistent with karst topography, though unusual for this geological region. The team's request for permits to conduct more invasive investigation was denied by both the Forest Service and the state's Historical Preservation Office, citing the area's designation as a culturally sensitive site, despite no official historical markers or public acknowledgement of its significance. Lead researcher Dr. James Harrington expressed frustration with this decision in a departmental email later obtained through public records requests. There's clearly something unusual about the geological formation under Linville. The density readings don't match anything in our comparative database. Whatever's down there, it's not just empty caves or typical rock formations. The university's reluctance to push harder for research access makes me wonder who's being protected here, the site from researchers or the public from what we might find. Dr. Harrington took early retirement shortly after this email was sent. He declined to be interviewed for this account, stating only that his interest in the Linville mountain anomalies was purely scientific and that he had no desire to become another footnote in the site's troubling history of disappearances and abandoned research. In 2022, a hiker reported finding a makeshift memorial at a remote location approximately 1 mile from the presumed Bennett property site. The memorial consisted of stones arranged in a rough circle, with various personal items placed in the center: a woman's hair clip, a tarnished military dog tag, a child's toy truck, and several other objects of indeterminate origin. Forest rangers dismantled the memorial, considering it unauthorized use of federal land. No official record was made of the specific items recovered or their disposition. The hiker who discovered the memorial later posted on an online forum dedicated to unsolved mysteries. The strangest thing wasn't the items themselves, but how they were arranged. They formed a pattern that seemed meaningful, though I couldn't tell you what it meant, and there were markings on the inner faces of the stones, not carved, but what looked like burn marks in precise geometric patterns. I took photos, but when I got home, every single one was corrupted in my camera. Just static where the memorial should have been. Burke County land records show that parcels adjacent to the Pisgah National Forest boundary near the former Bennett property have the highest turnover rate of any residential properties in the county. On average, homes in this area sell every 4.2 years, compared to the county average of 12.7 years. Real estate agents familiar with the area cite quality of life issues, including poor cell reception, frequent power outages, and a general feeling of isolation as factors in this turnover. One real estate agent, speaking anonymously, admitted, "We don't mention the Bennett story to potential buyers. It's just local folklore anyway. But I've shown properties in that area for 15 years, and I won't take appointments there after 4 in the afternoon, especially in the fall. Something about the quality of light there, the way shadows move, it just feels wrong. Animals feel it too. Dogs refuse to get out of cars. Birds go quiet. I've had 3 sales fall through after pets refused to enter properties, and these weren't nervous city folks. These were country people who know better than to ignore when animals sense something off. Current satellite imagery shows the area of the former Bennett property as an unremarkable section of mature forest. However, analysis of historical aerial photography dating back to the 1950s reveals an unusual pattern. Vegetation in an approximately 3-acre area corresponding to the presumed cabin site has been replaced completely at least 5 times over 7 decades, despite no recorded logging activity or natural disasters affecting only that specific location. Forestry experts consulted about this pattern suggested several possible explanations, including localized disease, soil contamination, or unusual microclimatic conditions. None could account for the precise boundaries of the affected area or the complete replacement of all vegetation types simultaneously. One expert, after examining the photographic evidence, commented that it appeared less like natural forest succession and more like something periodically sterilizing the soil completely. In 2023, an anonymous donor provided funds to the Burke County Historical Society for the installation of a small interpretive sign near a Forest Service road approximately 2 miles from the Bennett property site. The proposed text made no mention of the more disturbing aspects of the Bennett story, focusing instead on the family as an example of 19th-century agricultural settlement in the region. The Historical Society Board initially approved the project, but reversed their decision after receiving an unusual volume of correspondence from county residents opposing any official recognition of the Bennett property. According to meeting minutes, many of the letters cited versions of the same concern. Some stories are better left untold. Some places are better left unmarked. The donor subsequently withdrew the offer. When contacted through the law firm that had represented them, they declined to comment on their interest in the Bennett case or their identity. Local residents continue to report occasional unusual phenomena in the vicinity of Linville Mountain. These reports increase in frequency every 40 years, with the most recent cluster occurring between 2002 and 2004. Common elements include unexplained sounds described variously as whispering, grinding, or the mountain breathing, temporary disorientation even among experienced hikers familiar with the area, and the appearance of unusual markings on trees, rocks, and occasionally on the skin of those who have spent time near the site. Medical professionals in the region have noted these skin markings typically fade within 72 hours and show no signs of being deliberately created through cutting, burning, or chemical means. One dermatologist, in a letter to colleagues that was later published in a medical journal, compared them to sophisticated pressure patterns, as if the skin had been compressed against an intricately carved surface, yet the patterns appear on areas of the body that could not have been in contact with such objects, between shoulder blades, for instance, or across the lower back. Perhaps most disturbing is a pattern noted by mental health professionals serving the region. Every 4 decades, coinciding with the periods of increased phenomena around Linville Mountain, Burke County experiences a statistically significant spike in diagnoses of schizophrenia, dissociative disorders, and what one psychiatric report termed culturally atypical obsessive ideation focused on geological features. This pattern has been documented by the North Carolina Department of Health since 1963, but has never been publicly addressed or explained. Folklore researchers suggest the 40-year cycle may correspond to generational memory, long enough for direct warnings to fade into vague caution, for first-hand accounts to become dismissible stories. Each cycle brings a new generation unfamiliar with the specific dangers, drawn by curiosity or circumstance to rediscover what others tried to forget or conceal. One final note bears mentioning. County birth records show that in 1849, 6 years after the Bennett family's disappearance, a woman named Mary Johnson gave birth to a son in the Burke County poorhouse. She identified herself as a former slave of the Bennett family who had fled the property in 1843. The birth certificate lists the father as unknown. This child, named Isaiah Johnson, left Burke County as a young man and established himself as a moderately successful carpenter in Pennsylvania. His descendants, now dispersed across the country, share no obvious physical or genetic markers linking them to whatever transpired on Linville Mountain. Yet genealogical researchers have noted an unusual pattern. Approximately every 40 years, a member of the Johnson family lineage has returned to Burke County, drawn by what family letters and diaries describe as dreams of a mountain calling them home. The most recent such return occurred in 2019, when a 34-year-old software engineer named Marcus Johnson relocated from Seattle to Asheville, approximately 60 miles from Linville Mountain. In a blog post explaining his decision, Johnson wrote, "I've never been to North Carolina before, but these mountains feel familiar in a way I can't explain. It's like they've been waiting for me." Johnson's social media accounts show frequent hiking trips in the Pisgah National Forest. His last posted photo, from November 2023, shows a distant view of Linville Mountain at sunset. The caption reads, "Some places call to you. Some stories need to be remembered. Local authorities confirmed that Johnson was reported missing by his employer in December 2023, after failing to return from a weekend hiking trip. The search was hampered by an unusually early snowstorm. His backpack and camping equipment were found at a small clearing approximately 1 mile from the former Bennett property. Despite extensive search efforts, including the use of cadaver dogs and thermal imaging drones, no further trace of Marcus Johnson has been discovered. The case remains open. The mountain remains. And if the pattern holds, the cycle will begin again. In 2043, exactly 200 years after the Bennett family confronted whatever waits within Linville Mountain, whatever has been waiting there since long before European settlement, whatever continues to call to those whose bloodlines it has tasted, whatever hungers still. Those with knowledge of the region's history avoid the area, especially in autumn when the leaves fall and the boundaries between past and present, between known and unknown, seem somehow more permeable. They tell their children to stay on marked trails, to return before dark, to pay attention when animals go suddenly quiet in the woods. They do not speak of the Bennett family by name. They do not point toward the unmarked site where the cabin once stood. But they remember in the way that rural communities remember, not in written histories or official records, but in the subtle knowledge of which places to avoid, which stories not to tell too loudly, which mountain slopes to turn away from when darkness falls. And sometimes, on clear nights when the moon casts sharp shadows through the trees, they might place a small offering at the edge of their property. Not because they believe the old stories, they would insist, but because certain traditions endure for reasons no one quite remembers, but everyone somehow understands. The mountain remembers. The mountain waits. The mountain hungers.